My husband was cheating on me with another man. I secretly packed my bags and disappeared. I used to believe the worst thing a wife could hear was her husband whispering another woman's name. I was wrong, because when I found the messages on Christopher's phone, the name that shattered me wasn't a woman's. It was Craig, his best friend. The man who toasted at our wedding, called me sister, and spent every Sunday in our living room watching football with my husband. At first I thought it was a mistake, some cruel misunderstanding, but then I saw the photos. The same hands that once held me holding someone else, the same smile I fell in love with, reflected in another man's eyes. Before we get into this, tell me, where are you watching this from? Comment your city below, hit that subscribe button, and like the video. Now let's go on with the story. That night I didn't scream, I didn't throw things. I just sat on our porch in Charleston, listening to the waves crash against the shore, and realized my life had quietly ended. At dawn, I started packing. One suitcase, one secret, one heartbeat away from breaking. By the time Christopher woke up, I was gone. No confrontation, no closure, just silence. And a note that said, "You don't owe me the truth, but one day you'll owe it to yourself." The road out of Annapolis was still asleep when I crossed it. Mist clung to the bay like a secret that refused to rise. The world muted in shades of gray and pale blue. The air tasted of salt and cold metal. My car heater hadn't yet warmed up, so I sat shivering, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the suitcase beside me. My whole life reduced to a single zipped echo. In the rearview mirror, the house looked small. Our house, the one Christopher painted himself last spring, the one with the white shutters and the roses I planted along the porch. I'd once believed that house could keep us together, that if the walls were beautiful enough, the cracks between us might close. But lies are louder than paint. And silence, I've learned, has a sound of its own. It had started weeks earlier, when Christopher began coming home late from the architecture firm. He said the deadlines were brutal, the economy unpredictable. "Everyone's stressed, Em," he'd muttered, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he was hiding something. At first I believed him, because that's what love does. It makes you build excuses faster than truth. But then came the scent. Not perfume, cologne. Woodsy, masculine. Expensive. It clung to his jacket, to his hair, a scent I didn't wear and couldn't ignore. That night when his phone buzzed on the counter, I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even curious. I was tired, and that kind of exhaustion is dangerous. It turns hesitation into impulse. When I read the message, still thinking about last night, Craig, my throat went dry. I scrolled and the messages became worse with each swipe. Words that used to be ours, now theirs. Photographs of laughter, hotel sheets, coffee cups for two. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the mug he'd left half full. He had said Craig so many times over the years that the name had become part of our daily vocabulary. Craig this, Craig that. Craig, who helped him get the promotion. Craig, who always had his back. Craig, who was now holding my husband's face in the kind of tenderness I hadn't seen in years. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the ticking of the grandfather clock, that endless rhythm of ordinary life, still pretending nothing had happened. I watched the first light of morning spill through the blinds, tracing the outline of our wedding photo on the wall. We looked happy there, two young fools frozen in a smile wide enough to hide the truth neither of us knew yet. And I realized something devastating. Maybe he'd never lied about loving me. Maybe he had just never been allowed to love himself. When Christopher finally came home that night, I didn't ask where he'd been. I didn't demand an explanation. He kissed my forehead, his lips trembling like he already knew. "Long day," he said. I nodded. "Want me to make dinner?" I asked. He smiled with tired gratitude. "You're too good to me, Em." "No," I thought. "I'm just too quiet." That's when I decided I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to cry. I would simply disappear. The next morning, while he slept, I moved through the house in silence. I folded clothes, slid my passport into my purse, and tucked my wedding ring inside the small porcelain bowl where I used to keep car keys. I looked around the kitchen one last time, the space where I'd built so many small versions of happiness. The mug he always used sat on the counter. I washed it, dried it, and set it upside down. A small, ordinary kindness. My last one. Then I wrote the note. You don't owe me the truth, but one day you'll owe it to yourself. I placed it on his pillow. By the time the first rays touched the Chesapeake, I was gone. I didn't cry as I drove north along Route 50. I didn't think about where I was heading. The world felt wide again, almost merciful. Somewhere between Easton and Cambridge, the sky began to open, streaks of gold cutting through the gray. It was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of my tires and my heartbeat, both steady, both uncertain. I didn't know who I was without him, but I was ready to find out. As the miles stretched on, I realized leaving wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was not looking back. Because love doesn't die in the moment of betrayal, it dies slowly, like a house emptied room by room. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt the smallest spark of peace, the kind that comes not from winning, but from finally walking away. I whispered to the road ahead, "You don't get to define me anymore, Christopher." The wind caught my words and carried them east toward the bay, where the water gleamed like liquid silver. And I drove. Toward nothing, toward everything, toward the woman I was always meant to be. The tone remained cinematic and intimate, slow, atmospheric, and emotionally grounded in Maryland. By the time I crossed the Bay Bridge, the morning fog had lifted. The sun caught the water in flashes, silver and white, and for a moment it looked almost holy. But peace isn't a place, it's a distance. And I was still learning how far I had to go to feel it. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. Each mile pulled me farther from the life I built, and closer to the one I hadn't yet imagined. I kept glancing at my phone, even though it was switched off, as if some small part of me still expected Christopher to call, to say my name the way he used to, before everything twisted into secrecy. But he didn't call. And that silence was louder than any apology could ever be. By noon, I found myself in a small town just outside Chestertown, the kind of place that felt too quiet for its own history. The streets were lined with brick homes and pale shutters, the air faintly sweet with the scent of honeysuckle and salt. I checked into a modest inn off Main Street. 2 floors, faded wallpaper, the hum of an old radiator. The woman at the desk smiled kindly when I signed the register. "Visiting family?" she asked. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Just passing through." She nodded, the way people do when they know not to press. Room 7 was small but clean. 1 bed, 1 window, 1 life waiting to be rearranged. I dropped my suitcase and sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the pattern of tiny blue flowers on the curtains. For the first time in years, no one expected anything from me. No dinner to cook, no small talk to fill the silence. And yet that silence pressed heavy, like the space left behind when someone moves out of a photograph. In the afternoon, I walked through town. There was a bookstore, a bakery, a small art gallery tucked between 2 antique shops. I wandered aimlessly, watching strangers laugh over coffee, wondering if they could tell I was unraveling beneath my coat. Every corner of Maryland felt familiar and foreign at once. The seagulls still called, the wind still smelled of rain. But I was different now, hollowed out, stripped clean. At a small diner near the waterfront, I ordered soup and tea. The waitress, a woman about my age with tired eyes and kind hands, poured me a refill and said, "You look like someone starting over." I froze. "What makes you say that?" She smiled softly. "People who belong somewhere don't stare out windows like that." Her words hit harder than she knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned slow circles above me, each creak another reminder of what I'd left behind. I thought about our house in Annapolis, the one we bought with joint savings and too much hope. Every inch of that house was built on lies I'd painted over with patience. The anniversary trips he canceled for work, the weekends Craig just happened to visit, the way Christopher's eyes lit up when Craig entered a room and dimmed when I did. Looking back, it was all there. The clues, the moments, the quiet betrayals disguised as loyalty. I had built that house believing love was something you could earn through endurance. But love built on denial isn't love. It's self-erasure. At dawn, I walked to the pier. The wind off the bay was sharp, cold enough to sting. I thought of Christopher then, not with hate, but with a strange, aching compassion. Maybe he'd spent his whole life pretending too. Maybe the lie didn't start with me. Still, compassion doesn't excuse cruelty, and secrets, no matter how noble their origin, always rot in the dark. I took a deep breath, pulled my scarf tighter, and whispered into the wind, "You don't get to haunt me anymore." The tide rolled in and out, steady and indifferent. That afternoon, I walked back into town and past the little art gallery I'd seen earlier. Through the window, sunlight spilled across a canvas. A painting of an empty chair by a window, a teacup resting beside it. Something about it stopped me. There was loneliness in the brush strokes, but also peace. A quiet kind of freedom. A sign by the door read, "Gallery assistant needed. Apply within." I stood there for a long moment, staring at that sign, until the wind pushed my hair across my face like an invitation. And for the first time since I left, I smiled. Because maybe healing didn't start with forgetting. Maybe it started with creating something new. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years, "I am Emily again. Not a wife, not a secret, not a shadow of someone else's truth. Just me. And this time, I'm building something honest, even if it's only myself." I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the night cradle me. Outside, the wind swept over the bay, carrying away what I no longer needed to hold. The first morning I woke up in Chestertown, I didn't know whether to cry or breathe. For a moment, I lay there, listening for footsteps that would never come, for a voice that no longer had my name on its tongue, but there was only the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks in the window, and somewhere far off, the soft cry of a gull. I turned toward the empty half of the bed and let the truth settle. Christopher hadn't called. Not that night. Not the morning after. Not once. No pleading, no apology, not even curiosity about where I'd gone. Just silence. The kind that spreads like cold water through every thought, every heartbeat, until you start to wonder if you were ever real to the person who swore you were their everything. I got up, made instant coffee with the tiny kettle in my room, and stared out at the narrow street below. The town was small, still half asleep. Brick buildings, a bakery, a line of parked cars dusted with early frost. Maryland mornings have a way of being both harsh and forgiving. The cold stings, but it wakes you up. I took a sip of coffee and whispered, "I guess that's that." It wasn't bitterness. It was surrender. At 10, I walked back to the little art gallery on Main Street. The same one I'd seen the day before, sunlight pouring through its windows like a quiet invitation. Inside, a woman was rearranging paintings. Her silver hair caught the light, and she had the kind of calm presence that makes noise feel out of place. When she turned, her smile was small but genuine. "You must be the one about the job," she said. "Yes, Emily." "I'm Clara," she replied. "You have any experience?" "Not officially," I said, folding my hands, "but I've always loved art. I used to paint." "Good enough for me," she said, setting down a frame. "We could use an extra pair of hands. Can you start today?" I blinked. "Today?" She shrugged. "If you're here, might as well stay." Something about her simplicity broke through the numbness. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll stay." The gallery became a small kind of refuge. I dusted shelves, arranged displays, labeled sculptures. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. Every afternoon, sunlight spilled across the floor, and I'd catch my reflection in the glass. a woman trying to remember what she looked like without disappointment in her eyes. Sometimes Clara would talk while we worked. Stories about her daughter in Vermont, her late husband, the artists who brought their canvases in for consignment. But she never asked about me. Maybe she saw something familiar in my quiet. At closing one evening, she paused by the door and said, "You move like someone who's learning to trust stillness." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." "Good," she said. "Stillness teaches what noise hides." Nights were the hardest, not because I missed Christopher, but because I didn't know how to stop missing the life I'd built around him. The routine, the rhythm, the illusion of being seen. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation we'd ever had, trying to spot the moment he started drifting away. Maybe it was a year ago. Maybe it was always. Maybe the marriage had been a slow goodbye disguised as a promise. And through it all, the phone stayed dark. No messages, no calls, nothing. His silence said everything words never could. Days turned into a rhythm of quiet survival. I walked to the gallery in the mornings, ate sandwiches by the river, sketched in the evenings. One afternoon, while rearranging some prints, Clara found me staring too long at a painting of an open door leading into sunlight. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. I nodded. "It looks like freedom." "Maybe that's what you see, because it's what you need." Her words lingered long after she left the room. That night, I found the courage to paint again. I spread a small canvas on the table near the window of my room and dipped a brush into blue paint. The first stroke felt clumsy, but then the rhythm came back. Slow, deliberate, honest. I painted an ocean horizon, empty except for a single boat drifting away from shore. When I finished, I sat back and studied it under the weak lamplight. It didn't look sad to me. It looked free. I wrote a line in my journal. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's permission. By late October, Chestertown began to change. Leaves burned orange along the sidewalks. The air turned sharp with the smell of rain and wood smoke, and little by little, the ache inside me started to quiet. I dreamed of water, of the bay swallowing everything I'd left behind. When I woke, the room was quiet, the world still. And for the first time since leaving Annapolis, the silence didn't hurt. It simply was. I poured myself coffee, watched the sun crawl over the rooftops, and whispered to the morning, "He didn't call, and that's okay." Because maybe some endings don't need noise. Maybe some goodbyes are meant to be met with nothing, so you can finally hear yourself again. By November, Chestertown had turned to gold. The maples along High Street were rust-colored ribbons, their leaves gathering in soft piles by the sidewalks. Every morning, I walked to the gallery with a cup of coffee warming my hands, my breath white in the crisp air. It was strange how quickly a place could start to feel like a person, how a town could listen when no one else did. The rhythm of my days had become simple. Gallery at 10, lunch by the river, painting in the evenings. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like drowning. It had softened into something I could carry without breaking. Sometimes, Clara would look up from her desk and say, "You're quieter than usual today?" And I'd laugh. "I'm always quiet." She'd shake her head. "No, not quiet like that. Quiet like peace." And she was right. For the first time in years, I was beginning to understand what peace sounded like. And it wasn't silence. It was breath, steady, unapologetic, alive. It was a Thursday when he first came into the gallery, tall, with a camera hanging from his shoulder and a jacket dusted with cold air. His eyes were gentle, the kind that notice things most people overlook. He walked slowly, studying each painting as though they were confessions. When he reached the counter, he smiled faintly. "Do you know the artist who painted the window piece in the back, the one with the blue curtains?" "That's me," I said before I could stop myself. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You?" I nodded, embarrassed. "Just something I was experimenting with. Clara let me hang it for a while." "Well," he said, looking at it again, "it feels honest." That word caught me off guard. honest. Most people called art beautiful or emotional, but honest, that was something else. He offered his hand. I'm Noah. Emily. He nodded once, then took a business card from his pocket. I'm a freelance photographer. I shoot for a few travel magazines, mostly small towns like this, places people forget exist. Sounds peaceful, I said. He smiled softly. Peaceful can be lonely, but I think that's the point. And just like that, he was gone, leaving the faint smell of cedar and cold air behind him. The days that followed unfolded quietly. Noah stopped by a few more times, sometimes to buy a print, sometimes just to talk. He asked about my art, about what drew me to paint windows and shorelines. Maybe because they don't move, I told him. Because they let light in, even when everything else feels closed. He smiled at that, like he understood more than I'd said. We didn't exchange numbers, but somehow he always showed up when the sky turned gray, a shadow in the doorway, a question in his eyes he never voiced. There was no rush between us, no spark demanding to be named, just quiet understanding. And maybe that was what I needed most. Someone who didn't demand my story, who didn't fill the silence with noise. One night, after closing, Clara and I shared tea by the front window. The wind outside had picked up, carrying leaves down the street in spirals. You seem lighter, she said. I think I'm learning to exist without waiting for someone else to notice I'm here, I replied. Clara smiled, her eyes kind. That's the secret, Emily. The moment you stop waiting to be found, you already are. I wanted to tell her everything. About Christopher, about Craig, about the silence that followed me here. But I didn't. Some truths are too raw to speak. Instead, I said, I started painting again. I know, she said softly. Your work looks different now. It breathes. That weekend, Noah invited me to join him for coffee at a small cafe by the docks. The air was cold enough to sting, but sunlight danced on the water, turning everything silver. He asked about where I was from. Annapolis, I said. Beautiful place. It was, I said simply. He didn't push for details. Instead, he pointed his camera toward the horizon and clicked. Sometimes, he said, the best pictures come when the subject isn't posing. I smiled faintly. That's true for people too. We talked until the light began to fade, about art, about the ocean, about the things we leave behind when we start over. When he walked me back toward Main Street, he said, You seem like someone who's been through a storm. I have, I said, but I made it to shore. He nodded. Then you'll be just fine. That night, back in my room, I stared at the phone on the bedside table. Still dark, still silent. Weeks had passed, and Christopher hadn't called, not once. And for the first time, I didn't ache because of it. His silence had become a wall I could lean on, proof that I no longer belonged in his world, and he no longer controlled mine. I picked up my brush and began painting again. This time, I painted a figure standing on a dock, wind in her hair, facing the open sea. There was no sadness in her posture, only readiness. When I finished, I whispered to myself, This is what it means to breathe again. The tide outside rolled in and out, soft and rhythmic, like lungs filling with air, and somewhere deep inside me, I realized the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. The first frost came early that year. By December, the air in Chestertown was sharp enough to bite through my coat, the sidewalks silvered with ice. Each morning I watched the river freeze a little more along the edges, like it, too, was learning how to be still. At the gallery, Christmas lights hung along the windows. Clara hummed as she arranged new canvases, and for once I found myself laughing with her. It felt strange, that laughter, foreign but welcome, like a sound my throat hadn't made in years. Noah stopped by sometimes, always with coffee, sometimes with a question. He'd begun photographing the town under snowlight, catching reflections of buildings in puddles and shadows. When he pointed the camera at me one morning, I turned away, half smiling. Still shy? he teased. Still learning how to exist, I said. He lowered the lens. You're doing just fine. And for a moment I almost believed him. That night, the wind howled against my window like something alive. I sat at my small table, painting a stormy sea. Thick gray brushstrokes twisting into white foams. It was the kind of peace that drained me and filled me all at once. Then my phone rang. The sound startled me so badly that I nearly dropped the brush. It had been weeks, months even, since I'd heard that tone. My chest tightened. The screen glowed with a name I hadn't seen in what felt like another lifetime. Christopher. I froze, every part of me waiting, remembering. I could have ignored it. I should have. But something in me, the part that still needed to close the last door, reached for the phone. I pressed answer. Emily? His voice was raw, softer than I remembered. He sounded smaller somehow, like guilt had scraped something out of him. For a moment I couldn't speak. I could hear his breathing on the line, uneven and strained. Finally I said quietly, You found me. He let out a shaky laugh. No, not really. I've been trying. I didn't know if you were even alive. I'm alive, I said. I didn't mean for... Don't, I cut in. Don't start with excuses. Silence stretched between us, heavy as the winter air. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. I don't even know how to explain it, Emily. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't plan any of this. You didn't have to plan it, I said. You just had to lie long enough for me to believe you. I swear, I loved you. Did you? My voice trembled, but it wasn't fear. Because love doesn't hide in hotel rooms. It doesn't whisper someone else's name when I'm standing in the same room. He went quiet. I heard him inhale, the sound of regret, too late to save anything. I didn't mean for you to find out like that, he said finally. I laughed, hollow and soft. There's no good way to find out your husband prefers someone else, especially when that someone calls you brother. He choked on a word I didn't catch. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose everything, he said. But you did, I whispered. And the worst part is, I didn't take anything from you. You destroyed it yourself. A gust of wind slammed against the window, rattling the glass. I closed my eyes. The words came easier now, each one loosening something inside me that had been knotted for too long. I'm not calling to beg, he said. I needed to hear your voice. I needed to know if you hate me. I thought about that. The truth was complicated. I didn't hate him. I hated the version of myself that believed him. No, I said softly. I don't hate you, Christopher. I pity you. He sucked in a breath. You've spent your whole life pretending, to me, to Craig, to yourself. You can't love anyone when you're that lost, not even me. He didn't respond. I could hear him crying quietly, the sound of a man who finally realized the wreckage he'd made. Emily, he whispered, I don't even know who I am anymore. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I think that's the first honest thing you've said to me, I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence hummed between us. Not painful this time, just empty. Done. Then I said, softly but firmly, You don't get to call this love. You don't get to call me your wife. He tried to speak again, but I didn't let him. Goodbye, Christopher. And I ended the call. For a while, I just sat there, the phone still in my hand, the room impossibly quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. I waited for the ache to rise, for the tears to fall, but neither came. There was only stillness. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes against the dark glass. I set the phone down and turned back to my painting. Under the gray sky I'd been working on, I added a single streak of light breaking through the clouds, a reminder that even storms make space for morning. When I stepped back, I saw something I hadn't painted before. Hope. Small, subtle, unashamed. I rinsed my brush, poured myself tea, and whispered into the quiet, "It's over now." And somewhere deep inside, I felt the truth of it settle, not as pain, but as peace. The morning after Christopher called, Chestertown felt different. The light was too sharp, the air too still, as if the world had paused, waiting to see what I'd do now that the ghost had finally spoken. I walked to the gallery early, the cold biting at my fingers. The snow from the night before had turned the sidewalks white, softening everything it touched. Clara greeted me with her usual calm smile. "You look lighter," she said, hanging her scarf. "Maybe I am," I answered, and I meant it. The phone call hadn't broken me. It had done the opposite. It ended the part of me still waiting for an apology. For a few weeks, life found rhythm again. Noah and I grew closer, quietly, without need for labels. We talked over coffee, shared long walks along the water, sometimes said nothing at all. He never asked about Christopher. I never offered. There was comfort in that silence, an understanding that not every truth needed to be spoken to be known. One evening, we stood by the pier watching the sky burn orange. Noah lifted his camera, but instead of taking a photo, he lowered it again. "Some moments don't need proof," he said. I smiled. "That's the photographer in you talking?" He shook his head. "That's the man." His words lingered in the air long after we parted ways. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address, just my name, Emily, written in slanted handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, blurry. It showed me standing outside the gallery a few days earlier, head turned, hair caught in the wind. My breath caught. There was no note, no message, just that image. For a moment, I thought maybe Noah had taken it, some quiet artistic gesture, but something about it felt wrong. The angle was distant, observing, watching. I folded the photo carefully and slipped it into a drawer. Coincidence, I told myself. Small town, curious eyes. But the next day, I found another envelope. This one contained nothing but a torn page from a newspaper, an article about Christopher's firm in Annapolis. The headline read, "Architecture Firm Under Investigation. CEO Christopher McGee Missing." My pulse stuttered. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the room spinning slightly. He was missing? The article was brief, said only that the company was under scrutiny for financial misconduct and that Christopher hadn't been seen in over a week. There was a line about his personal difficulties following a recent marital separation. I read it twice, then folded it beside the photo. The air in my room felt suddenly smaller, heavier. Maybe he'd run. Maybe the walls finally caved in around him. But why send this to me? Who even knew where I was? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building made my heart jump. I sat by the window, watching headlights slide across the snow outside. Once I thought I saw someone pause by the corner lamppost. A dark figure, motionless. But when I blinked, they were gone. The next morning, I arrived at the gallery pale and quiet. Clara noticed instantly. "Bad dreams?" she asked. "Something like that," I murmured. I wanted to tell her everything, about the letters, the photo, the article, but the words stuck in my throat because saying it aloud would make it real. As the week went on, the feeling didn't fade. Every reflection in a shop window made me look twice. Every passing car felt too familiar. I started taking side streets home, locking my door twice, closing the curtains before dark. Still, when I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the thought, what if Christopher wasn't missing? What if he was looking for me? One evening, I sat at my desk with the two envelopes spread before me, the photo and the article. I studied them in the low lamplight. There was no handwriting on the second one, just the clean fold of paper, deliberate and neat. Whoever sent them wanted me to see, but not to know who showed me. I whispered into the quiet, "What do you want from me?" No answer came, just the steady hum of the radiator, the sound of my own breath. I gathered the envelopes, locked them in my drawer, and turned off the light. But as I crawled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone was still watching, and that my carefully built peace was beginning to crack. The letter came on a Thursday, thicker than the others, hand-delivered, no stamp, no address. Inside was a single note, written in Christopher's handwriting. "I need to see you, please. Room 412, Harborview Hotel, tonight." For a long moment, I just stared at it, the paper trembling in my hands. I hadn't heard from him since that phone call, the one that ended everything. I thought he'd finally disappeared into his silence, swallowed by the mess he made. But now this, room 412, Harborview, tonight. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to walk straight to the river and let the wind take it. But curiosity has a pulse of its own, steady, treacherous, impossible to silence. By sunset, I was already driving. The Harborview Hotel sat at the edge of the Chesapeake, its lights reflecting off the water like scattered coins. Snow had begun to fall again, quiet and relentless, coating everything in pale softness. I parked by the curb and sat in the car for a long time, engine idling, breath fogging the glass. What was I even doing here? He was a ghost, and yet ghosts have a way of calling you back. I turned off the ignition. The hallway to room 412 smelled faintly of bleach and cold air. The carpet muffled my steps, and somewhere in the distance, a vacuum cleaner hummed like white noise. When I knocked, there was no answer at first. Then the door opened slowly, and there he was, Christopher. He looked nothing like the man I'd left. His hair was longer, unkempt, his eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness. His once tailored life now hanging off him like a loose thread. "Emily," he breathed, as if saying my name hurt. I didn't move. "You shouldn't have found me," I said. He gave a small, broken laugh. "That's all I've been doing, trying to find you." The room was dimly lit, curtains drawn. On the table sat a half-empty bottle of whiskey, papers scattered beside it. Invoices, legal documents, letters I didn't recognize. "What is this, Christopher?" I asked, glancing around. He ran a hand through his hair. Everything fell apart. The firm, the accounts, Craig. He trailed off, voice cracking. I stood by the door, arms crossed. "You're drunk." "No," he said quietly. "Just done." He sank into the chair, staring at the floor. "Craig left me. Took money, blackmailed the firm, leaked files. He told the investors everything." "I'm being investigated, Emily. They think I was part of it." I didn't feel pity, only a cold, sad kind of clarity. "You built your world on lies," I said. "It was bound to collapse." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every night wishing I could undo it all?" "You can't," I said simply. He exhaled, long and shaking. "I wanted to tell you the truth that night, the night you left. I almost did." "You had years, Christopher." He nodded slowly. "I know." Silence filled the space between us, thick, suffocating. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. "He's gone, Emily. Craig's gone." I blinked. "What do you mean, gone?" "They found his car near the bridge 2 nights ago. Empty. Keys still inside." He swallowed hard. "The police think he jumped." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't grief, not really, but a strange, heavy sadness for how broken everything had become. Secrets, shame, love twisted into destruction. Christopher stood slowly, his voice trembling. "You were the only real thing I ever had, Emily, and I destroyed that too." I took a step back. "Don't. Please," he whispered. "Just forgive me." I met his eyes, tired, desperate, searching for redemption that wasn't mine to give. "I already did," I said. "That's why I left." He flinched like I'd struck him. I moved toward the door. "You need to fix what's left of your life, Christopher. Stop looking for me in the pieces." He reached for my hand, not forcefully, just lightly, trembling. "I don't know who I am without you," he said. "You'll have to find out," I whispered, "the same way I did." And I walked out. The air outside was freezing, the kind that bites and clears your head all at once. Snowflakes clung to my hair as I stood by the railing overlooking the harbor. Behind me, the hotel windows glowed faintly through the fog, a single square of light where ghosts still lived. For the first time, I didn't feel like one of them. I pulled out my phone, deleted his number, and looked out over the dark water. Maybe forgiveness wasn't an act of mercy toward him. Maybe it was the final piece of freedom I owed myself. The snow kept falling, covering my footprints as I walked away. By the time I reached the car, the road was clean again. No trace of where I'd been or what I'd left behind. Winter in Chestertown was long and quiet, the kind of quiet that teaches you to listen to yourself. After the night at the Harborview Hotel, I didn't dream about Christopher anymore. His voice had finally fallen out of my head. His shadow no longer followed me into mornings, but something else took its place. Space. Empty, open, terrifying space. At first it felt like standing in a room after everyone's left. Then, slowly, it began to feel like standing at the edge of something new. The gallery had gone still after the holidays. Tourists vanished. The streets dusted with frost and silence. Clara spent her days writing grant proposals, while I worked alone in the back room, surrounded by brushes, paint, and the soft hum of an old heater. It was during those hours that I started to paint again, not to escape, but to remember who I was. My new series began with a single canvas, a woman standing in a field of snow, her back turned, her outline fading into mist. I called it The Art of Disappearing. Each stroke felt like exhaling something I'd been holding too long. Every color carried meaning: gray for grief, blue for clarity, gold for forgiveness. By the time I finished the first painting, Clara walked in and just stood there, her breath catching softly. "You found your voice," she said. I smiled faintly. I think I finally stopped whispering. Noah visited often, though he never pried about that night at the hotel. He'd bring pastries, or sometimes just sit nearby while I painted. There was comfort in his silence, the way he didn't demand to fill the air. One afternoon, he watched me work for a long time, then said quietly, "You don't paint like someone who's lost. You paint like someone who's still searching." "Maybe that's all healing is," I said. "Searching, but no longer running." He smiled. "You should show these, Emily. People need to see what starting over looks like." The thought made me nervous, the idea of being seen again. But something in me wanted it, needed it, so I said yes. By February, the gallery was filled with my work, 9 paintings, each one tracing the quiet evolution of a woman learning to exist again. We called the collection Unfinished Rooms. Opening night was small but full. Locals, a few reporters from nearby towns, and Noah with his camera slung across his shoulder. As I moved through the crowd, people stopped me, touched my arm, said words like beautiful, brave, raw. I nodded, smiled, thanked them. But inside, I was somewhere else. Because I knew these paintings weren't about beauty. They were about survival. Near the end of the evening, Clara raised a glass of wine and said, "To art, and to the quiet strength it takes to turn pain into color." I looked at her, then at Noah, then at the canvases hanging on the wall. And for the first time since leaving Annapolis, I didn't feel like a ghost wandering through my own story. I felt alive. When the last guest left, Noah helped me lock up. Snow had started to fall again, soft flakes drifting under the streetlights. "You did it," he said, smiling. "I didn't think I could," I admitted. "You didn't just disappear, Emily. You transformed." The words hit deep. I glanced up at the night sky, the snow settling on my hair. "I used to think disappearing was about being forgotten," I said softly. "Now I know it's about being free." Noah nodded. "Freedom suits you." That night, alone in my room, I lit a candle and opened my journal. I wrote only one line. "I'm no longer running from the past. I'm painting my way out of it." Then I turned off the light and stood by the window, watching the snow cover the streets, the rooftops, the river. Everything looked washed clean, blank, new, infinite. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized the art of disappearing wasn't about vanishing. It was about becoming visible to yourself again. Perfect. Here's your final chapter, Chapter 9, When the Sea Kept My Secret. It brings Emily's story full circle, quiet, powerful, and emotionally complete. Every thread, Marilyn's atmosphere, the ocean motif, her art, and her rebirth, comes together here. The winter began to thaw slowly, as if even Maryland was hesitant to let go of the cold. The river that had been frozen for months started to move again, ripples forming under the surface, soft and certain. One morning, I woke to the sound of it, the gentle rhythm of water against stone. It reminded me of that first night I left Annapolis, the same sound that carried me away from who I was, and I knew then that it was time to say goodbye properly. I closed the gallery early that day. Clara hugged me before I left. "You're quiet today," she said. "I'm just thinking," I answered, "about how far silence can carry a person." She smiled knowingly. "Farther than most roads." I drove toward the coast, past the small towns and empty fields, until the landscape opened wide, a stretch of gray-blue water meeting the horizon. The Chesapeake Bay was calm, the waves whispering against the shore like a lullaby I hadn't heard in years. I parked near the pier and walked until the boards creaked beneath my boots. In my pocket, I carried two things, my wedding ring and a folded note. The ring had felt like a weight for too long, a symbol of promises that had become prisons. The note was simple, written this morning on a scrap of paper. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be released. I stood there for a long while, the wind tangling my hair, the salt biting at my lips. And then I opened my hand and let both fall, the note first, then the ring. They hit the water with barely a sound and disappeared. The wind picked up. Seagulls cried overhead. I thought of Christopher, of the last time I saw him at the hotel, the guilt in his eyes, the way he said my name like an apology. I hoped he'd found peace somewhere, even if it wasn't the kind I gave him. Forgiving him had never been about letting him back in. It was about freeing myself from the weight of his choices. The sea didn't judge. It simply accepted what it was given. It swallowed my secret, my sorrow, and all the years I spent waiting for someone else to see me. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't disappearing anymore. I was arriving. When I turned back toward town, the air was softer, the world strangely bright. In the days that followed, my art began to change. The muted blues of grief gave way to light, golds, whites, soft greens. Clara noticed first. "These new paintings," she said one morning, running a hand along the drying canvas, "they look like hope." I smiled. Maybe that's what I've been painting toward all along. Spring came early that year. The river thawed completely, boats returning to the harbor, the air sweet with new beginnings. Noah's photography exhibit opened at the same time as my second show. We stood side by side at the gallery's entrance, watching people move through the rooms. His images on one wall, my paintings on the other. The light caught everything just right. Reflections, faces, small moments of awe. He leaned toward me and whispered, "You did it, Emily." "No," I said softly. "I lived it." He smiled, and I knew he understood. Because this wasn't a story about loss anymore. It was about becoming. That night, after the crowd left and the lights dimmed, I stepped outside. The air smelled of rain and river salt, the same scent that carried me out of my old life and into this one. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness, "You kept my secret long enough, sea. Now you can let it go too." The wind swept past me, gentle and sure, as if answering. I walked home slowly, the streets glimmering with puddles of light, my reflection flickering in each one. For the first time, I didn't see a woman escaping. I saw a woman becoming. And when I reached my door, I turned back for one last look at the bay. endless, open, alive. "They called it running away," I whispered. But really, I was running home. Then I went inside, closed the door behind me, and exhaled the past for the last time. So go ahead, tap subscribe, hit like. If your heart stopped when she read that message from Craig, if you held your breath when she drove away from Annapolis at dawn, or if you felt that peace when she dropped her wedding ring into the Chesapeake, and share this video with someone who's ever had to walk away quietly, because if you've watched until the end, you already know what it means to watch a woman lose everything and still choose to become more than what broke her. Click the next video on your screen and step into another story of betrayal, rebirth, and strength that refuses to stay silent.